If you're like me, that short clip should have released an unexplainable amount of dopamine in your brain. Something about great melee combat systems in video games just does that to my brain chemistry and just leaves me wanting more. More KOs, more launchers, and more bass. But beyond that, a great melee combat system achieves something that many games try but fail to accomplish, and that's making the simple action of attacking feel good. I've been playing the hell out of Dragon's Dogma 2 and I've got a lot to say about the game. Don't get me wrong, there's good and there's bad. But the one thing I find myself praising about the game the most is that combat, particularly melee combat, is just so damn addictive. I'd find myself switching between the different vocations and just running from one town to another and basically fighting everything that moved. This allowed me to try out the new skills which I had learned and figure out how each vocation played along with their, strengths and weaknesses. It's easily one of the most fun melee combat systems I've played in a very, very long time, and I want to talk about that today. I believe it's an art to create a great melee combat system, and there are 3 key ingredients that come together to make a game's melee combat feel amazing and responsive. You want to feel like you're doing some sort of damage. That damage could be sustained over time using a flurry of attacks from smaller, lighter weapons. Or if you're a big weapon enjoyer like me, you'll like to see the charge up, the release, and that sweet damage coming out in one big burst. Either way you choose, the bottom line here is that doing damage and attacking should feel good and should be the main goal of a great melee combat system. The next question here is, how do you make attacking, one of the most basic actions in a game with any combat, feel good? I believe the easiest way you can do something like this is by making the enemy react to your hits, by either flinching or staggering them whenever an attack connects. This adds a very obvious visual cue that your attack has connected with an enemy and indicates that they feel the hit connect as well. This forms the basis for a fun and engaging melee combat system. Simple, right? We press the button, the character on screen attacks, and the enemy on screen goes ouch. But let's take it a step further. How can we get melee combat to feel even more responsive, weighty, and impactful? Let's take the basic concept of getting enemies to respond visually to hits by flinching and staggering and add a little bit of spice. I'm talking things like knockdowns, KOs, and maybe throw in a little bit of ragdolling here and there for smaller enemies. I love these, particularly when introduced in a manner that makes you feel rewarded as a player for playing the way that you chose, which also helps to sell the personality of your chosen class or weapon type. Let's take a look at how Dragon's Dogma 2 handled this. You've already seen the game running in the background, but let's break it down frame by frame. Let's say I'm fighting Lizard Boy over here and I go in and try and attack him. The deal with Lizard Boy is that he has this hard outer shell that makes him very resistant to damage and even causing certain bladed weapons to bounce off his shell harmlessly. However, when you flip him over, there's this soft, fleshy area that you can attack for massive damage. So this is pretty clear. The win condition against Lizard Boy as a melee character is flipping him over. Great. So how do we do that? And more importantly, how does the game make this fun? Let's go back to the game and review the moves at our disposal, but this time as a great weapon wielding warrior. Other than the basic side-to-side swipe and overhead attack, we have 4 equipped weapon skills. We have an uppercut, an upward stab, a charge attack, and my favorite of them all, the big slam. I chose these 4 skills in particular because it provides me with a tool to deal with every enemy type. For example, I'm able to deal with enemies around me easily with just the basic side-to-side attack, deal with larger enemies using the upstab, hit flying enemies with the uppercut, and punish, knock down enemies with the big slam. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's go back to our fight with Lizard Boy. Remember how his shell makes him hard to damage? Let's try and flip him over with one of our charged attacks. As you can see in the clip, I charge up my basic side-to-side swipe and release it as he's in range, which connects with his face and launches him in an arc which perfectly aligns with my swing. This then throws Lizard Boy off his feet and exposes that weak underbelly, which allows me to follow up with a quick and easy kill on an arguably annoying enemy. This is exactly what I mean, taking the way enemies react to attacks to the next level and drastically improving the experience of melee combat. Everything that happened in those 3 to 5 seconds exactly makes what combat's so damn fun in this game. If I were to break it down, 3 key things happen to make this cycle so enjoyable. The action, which is you, the player, making the attack, the reaction, which is the monster responding to being smacked in the face, and finally, the consequence or payout. The monster gets knocked off his feet and leaves their weak point exposed. I believe that this cycle is really what draws players in, keeping them engaged and immersed in the world as the enemies within it react in an authentic, meaningful way to being smacked in the face. This helps to keep the combat of the game feel much more impactful as you can see enemies reacting to your attacks in a manner other than just watching their HP bars drop. Improving enemy reactions to being attacked also helps to avoid many immersion-breaking combat encounters which are unfortunately more common in games nowadays. The most obvious example of this is spending time hacking away at a boss just to see them shrug off your attacks with no indication that they feel the damage you're dealing to them, other than watching their health bars slowly trickle down. Also, bonus points to Dragon's Dogma for showing the skin and flesh of monsters get visibly damaged and hurt the more you hit them. With that, we've covered the first building block of a great melee combat system, and that's having enemies visually react in a way where they feel the attack that you throw their way. Cut the music. Let's play a quick game here. Listen to the audio cues that I have collected for the sake of this video and tell me if you recognize them. These sounds are iconic in their own right, but listening to them should have instinctively triggered some sort of feeling or reaction. The first sound would have likely made you feel dominant or superior, giving you that sense that you have outsmarted your opponent and left them vulnerable with a well-timed parry. Granted, you are not the one on the receiving end of being parried, of course. The second sound would have instinctively triggered our "oh shit, I need to press the Mikiri counter button" or "oh shit, I need to jump" response. Thank you, Sekiro. But amongst all of these, I think the audio cue that represents the feeling that I'm talking about the most in terms of the power of audio cues in combat is the satisfying sound of pulling off a backstab or critical strike. Iconic in a league of its own, I believe that the humble backstab sound is a perfect example of audio cues in melee combat systems done right. It enhances the feeling of impact and gives you that extra layer of oomph that complements the visual cues we talked about earlier to help you, the player, feel that you are doing some serious damage. But outside of specific actions, audio cues can also help make combat feel more immersive as different weapons and attacks create different sounds as they connect with enemies. Let's go back to Dragon's Dogma. Regular strikes with our flaming lollipop basically leave a chunky thunky sound when they connect with Lizard Boy. Charged attacks, on the other hand, are complemented with a satisfying charge up sound which segues perfectly into a deeper impact noise as our weapon flings Lizard Boy backwards and off balance.
Never have I encountered
The most powerful attacks, like for instance the Big Slam, are accompanied by mighty bass on top of the satisfying charge up sounds which we talked about earlier. Which really sells the feeling that you're obliterating your enemy with a truly fearsome attack. I could go on for hours about all of the uses of audio in making combat feel great, but I think you get the idea at this point. The bottom line is that audio cues and feedback, especially when attacks connect, are powerful tools that can be used to draw in the player as they can hear their blows connect with their enemies in game. This combines with the visual cues we talked about earlier to make melee combat feel raw, visceral, and impactful, as you are now able to both see and hear enemies reacting to your attacks, adding even more sensory feedback to the combat experience. Now that we've covered the visual and audio cues, there's one more thing which I feel really makes great melee combat systems, and that's the feeling of tactility. Let's go back to visual cues. Remember how we talked about the first building block being the enemy reacting to your attacks? Let's build on that a little bit further. What if the environment, the world, the game engine itself reacted to your hits? Almost as if time itself paused for a while, took a look at the damage you were doing and went, "God damn boy," before letting you continue your onslaught. That tiny pause is known as a hit stop, and I'll let my friends explain the technical bits for me.
Let's start by defining what hit stop is. In the most technical sense, hit stop happens when you freeze an animation at a point of impact. This is typically used in games with melee combat, and it uniquely only happens to the player character.
Okay, let's pause it there. Now that we know what a hit stop is, let's talk about why it makes combat feel so responsive and tactile. Again, going back to Dragon's Dogma 2 for another example, when you hit an enemy with an attack, the game freezes for just a few frames before going back to regular speed. The reason this feels great is because it adds a layer of tactile feedback to landing attacks and increases the responsiveness of combat in general. Here are some examples of hit stop being included in games and hit stop being removed. Please take a look and let me know if you can feel the difference here. This feeling of weightiness and impact of combat can also be influenced by varying the amount of hit stop applied to certain attacks. For example, lighter and faster attacks are accompanied by smaller bouts of hit stop, while a powerful charged swing yields a far longer hit stop, which really sells the feeling of a truly fearsome attack connecting with an enemy. In Dragon's Dogma 2, hit stop is taken up a notch and does more than just make a hit feel powerful. No, it helps make hits feel important. It signifies a significant moment in the flow of combat, a turning point perhaps, where now it is your turn to do some serious damage. These are just a few examples of what I think makes a great melee combat system, which are the three core aspects I mentioned in this video, which is visual cues, audio cues, as well as tactile feedback. I know I didn't cover all the examples of other games which have great combat systems as well. God knows that there are way more examples that I could have used. But ultimately, what I'm trying to say is that great melee combat experiences are getting harder and harder to come by, and in my eyes, the greatest of them all engage our senses of sight, hearing, touch, and tactile feedback to create a truly memorable experience that sticks with you long after you put the game down, particularly Monster Hunter World and Iceborne. Even after not playing the game for years at this point, I will never forget the feeling of accomplishment as my friends and I mastered our various weapons and overcame tougher and tougher monsters. Again, what I'm trying to say is this: great combat systems leave a mark on you and put you in the shoes of your character with every swing, stab, and attack better than any other gameplay feature can. At least, that's what I think. Thank you so much for watching the video, and leave a like and subscribe. Thank you.